Hello, I'm Esther Gitu-Ewart. It's Monday, March 21st. This is Africa 54.
Russian forces continue to shell the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv as Ukraine rejects a Russian ultimatum. A closer look at African medical students from Ukraine who are finding sanctuary in Poland. And how a community aid group is tackling COVID inequality in South Africa.
The intense bombardment by Russian forces across much of Ukraine is reducing many of the cities to nothing more than bombed-out buildings and piles of rubble. Although Russian officials claim they are not targeting civilians, many civilians are being shelled. The Ukrainian deputy prime minister is rejecting a Russian ultimatum to surrender the besieged city of Mariupol Monday as Russian forces carried out more shelling on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Drone video shot Monday shows the massive scale of the damage caused by shelling, which hit residential houses and a shopping district in Kyiv's Podil district overnight. Ukraine's prosecutor general says the shelling killed at least 8 people. Russia's assault on Ukraine, now in its 4th week, has told along most fronts as Russia has failed to seize a single major Ukrainian city or swiftly topple the government. Russian officials are continuing to call the war the biggest attack on a European state since World War II, a special military operation to disarm Ukraine and protect it from Nazis. But the West is describing the conflict as a false pretext for an unprovoked war of aggression to subdue a country Russian President Vladimir Putin describes as illegitimate. The United Nations Human Rights Office says at least 900 civilians have been killed through midnight Saturday, but the real toll is probably much higher. The UN Refugee Agency says 10 million Ukrainians have been displaced, including some 3.4 million who have fled to neighboring countries such as Poland. Mostly women and children are flowing into Poland by train and on foot via Medyka, crossing Poland's busiest along the country's some 500-kilometer border with Ukraine, according to Reuters. More than 2 million Ukrainians have crossed into Poland since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Newly arriving refugees described scenes of panic during their escapes that included shelling and shooting overhead from Russian forces as they fled their cities and set off on long journeys out of the country. The International Organization for Migration says there are reports that another surge of refugees may be coming to Poland. George Galindo, a communications officer from IOM, says over 10,000 refugees per day are crossing into Poland at Medyka. Meanwhile, in Warsaw, Poland, the National Stadium has been turned into an administrative office to register new arrivals. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its 4th week, the UN says 10 million people are now displaced, both in and out of Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden travels to Europe this week to meet with allies to discuss the crisis. VOA Sarasha Arbasadi has more.
The Russian Defense Ministry released these images of its Su-35 fighter jet in action as a ministry spokesman said Russia launched another hypersonic long-range missile on what he described as a Ukrainian military target. It was the second such attack in as many days. This follows a week where Ukrainian officials said Russian forces destroyed a theater where hundreds sheltered in the building, bookended by the Russian spelling of children in the front and back. A representative from the Russian Foreign Ministry called the accusation a lie, a contradiction seen through the eyes of medics in Mariupol who for weeks have been fighting to save lives. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's Mariupol blockade will go down in history of responsibility for war crimes.
The United States, through our president and NATO alliance, are totally committed to this Ukrainian effort to stop Putin. The desperate things that he's doing now, killing innocent civilians and children, for goodness sakes, he will have a stained name in history forever for this.
UNHCR Chief Filippo Grandi tweeting this week the war in Ukraine so far displaced about 10 million people, nearly 1 in 4 Ukrainians, with more fleeing every day awaiting help from the West.
The president has had to be pushed and pulled to where he is today. It was Congress that brought about sanctions, that brought about the ban on Russian oil, that brought about weapons, and all of this big aid package that I voted for a week or two ago, $13 billion. So far, the administration has only released $1 billion of that.
Demonstrations around the world backing Ukrainians and denouncing the Russian invasion, even on the streets of Moscow, where authorities carry protesters to vans and drive them away. Perhaps none more famous than Marina Ovsyannikova on Russia's state TV, Channel 1. She burst into a live broadcast with a sign reading "No war" in English and "Don't believe propaganda, they are lying to you" here in Russian.
I could show to the rest of the world that Russians are against the war, and I could show to the Russian people that this is just propaganda, expose this propaganda for what it is, and maybe stimulate some people to speak up against the war. And I was hoping that my performance, in a way, would help people change their mind.
Her future remains unclear following a recently enacted Russian law criminalizing descriptions of the war in a negative way. The offense carries a jail term of up to 15 years. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Meanwhile, reporter Henry Ridgwell spoke with Kurt Volker, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO and former U.S. special advisor for Ukraine negotiations from 2017 to 2019. Volker expressed his views on where Putin stands at the moment and where he might go with the invasion next.
They are suffering tremendous casualties in Ukraine, but they also have tremendous resolve and will. And they feel that the tide has actually turned a little bit in their favor. And so they are not anxious to give away things in negotiations. They're anxious to actually defend their country. What we in the West, I think, need to be doing is providing the Ukrainians all the arms, all the support that we can to help them buy time so that these economic sanctions against Russia have an even bigger impact. A successful settlement and a fair settlement would only come if Russia withdraws its forces from Ukraine. And that will only happen if the Russians feel that they are, in fact, overstretched, not able to sustain the effort, and it is becoming too costly on Russia as a country.
Kurt Volker is a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. The effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine are clearly visible to immigrants who are studying or working in the country before the war broke out. Many have fled to Poland to find safer housing and start new lives, while others left for other countries. VOA's Mary Mugawe spoke to 2 African medical students from Ukraine who are now staying with a family in the city of Świnoujście in Poland.
Immigrants who fled the war in Ukraine and end up in Poland include foreign nationals from African countries. Among them, Angela Alex, a Tanzanian who was a second-year medical student at Kyiv Medical University. She met with the Nigerian citizen, a first-year student at Taras Shevchenko National University in Ukraine, on their way to Poland. Their journey was not easy. She recalls how her life was in Ukraine before the war.
As she said, it felt like home. Like there was no much difference other than the language and other barriers, but it was just normal.
Angela said she never imagined that one day her life would change and she would find herself a Ukrainian refugee living in Poland. After Russia invaded Ukraine, she was worried and she realized she had to leave.
When I first heard the bombs, it was, I think it was on 4 a.m., as everybody says it. It was 4 a.m. And when you hear the bombs, it was hard to believe, like, oh, this is actually happening, because I thought probably it was fireworks or something like that, or as people celebrating. But so when we started seeing, as the days went by, we started seeing smoke in different areas, transportations were being closed, and we're like, okay, this is serious.
Goodness Ifabumuye from Nigeria also decided to leave Kyiv as soon as she received reports of an invasion.
There were times where we heard this loud sound and everything, and the bed would shake a little, but we just felt, no, it's far. But like this day, I woke up and I could see smoke from afar. That was when I knew that, okay, this thing is actually coming. And unfortunately, the airports were closed. But at some point, I just said I had to go. So I just packed like my basic bag and I was like, I have to leave. So that's what I did.
The lives of these two girls changed drastically after they found themselves in Poland in the city of Siedlce. They are now staying with Polish couple. Goodness relates what she witnessed at the Ukraine-Poland border and how she met their hosts.
I think when I got to the border, I don't know, I put a call through to my embassy, but I wasn't able to get, a definite arrangement from them. So there's this man, a volunteer, introduced us to a particular woman. It was through her that we were able to connect to this Good Samaritans.
Angela and Goodness, they say they have started new life, but they don't see any immediate hope of returning to Ukraine, even though they're still studying online. They say their future plan is not to return to Africa until they complete their transfer and continue their studies at the college in other European countries. Mary Mgawe, VOA in Poland.
Hundreds of Nigerian students who safely fled Ukraine were close to graduating when Russia invaded the country. But despite being under fire, some Ukrainian teachers have continued their classes online, where they're exchanging stories of hope and survival. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
Final year medical student from Ukraine, Dominic Oru, was 2 months short of completing his degree when Russian forces invaded Ukraine. Like hundreds of others from his city, he fled to Romania and returned to Nigeria in early March. Since then, Oru and his colleagues have resumed their classes online, but only after a reunion following their sudden departure.
So our major conversation was about how we didn't get to have a proper goodbye to each other, because we're thinking that, we still had time. There was going to be the graduation ceremony where we're going to have pictures and everything.
Still, Oru says he is keeping his hopes high, despite worrying about his teacher in Ukraine, who is doubling as a frontline responder.
He looks really, really very stressed. He looked like he had very little amount of sleep. You could see the eye bags around his eyes. For my class, which I had on Monday, about 30 minutes to the end of the class, he got a call, and of course he excused himself.
Nigerian authorities said around 8,000 nationals were in Ukraine when the invasion began. About 5,000 of them were students. Freshman medical student Fatima Bafa has started virtual learning as well, catching up on her studies and with her friends. But for her, it's not the same.
So I really miss attending my physical classes, seeing my friends, and my teachers.
Fatima's parents say she must stay out of Ukraine.
We can't take her back. We need the place that she studies faithfully, because my daughter, she's so young. She's just 16 years.
Oru and his colleagues were planning a big dinner party to celebrate their graduation, but now he fears he may never see some of his classmates again. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
Would like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Don't miss Lino Mudu's Tuesday Health Report. And still to come, Zimbabwe announces a plan to construct affordable homes. But first, Eddie Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll talk with African students who have returned home from Ukraine. What attracted so many of them to universities in the Eastern European country? And what is next for them? Also, Africa wants its doctors and nurses working abroad to return to the continent. We'll explore Africa's so-called brain drain and hear from the former president of Mauritius about ways to reverse it. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Lino Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Turning to West Africa now, Burkina Faso's armed forces say 13 soldiers are dead following an ambush by suspected jihadists in the country's eastern region. It was the 6th attack of its kind in the nation in under 2 weeks. A military unit carrying out a security operation on Sunday was attacked about 20 kilometers east of Natiabouani. Natiabouani lies 60 kilometers south of Fadanguruma, the largest town in the eastern region that has been targeted by armed groups since 2018. Uganda is mourning the death of its parliamentary speaker, Jacob Lokori Oulanya, who died over the weekend in the United States. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni tweeted that he received the sad news of Oulanya's death on Sunday morning. Oulanya, 56, died while receiving treatment in a Seattle hospital, where he had been admitted since February 2021. A statement posted on its website, a VOA affiliate NBS TV in Kampala, says President Museveni has appointed a committee to be in charge of the funeral arrangements for Oulanya. A World Bank study reveals South Africa to be the most unequal country in the world. Women of color are hit hardest by unemployment and gender-based violence, both made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. While analysts say apartheid and poor governance are to blame, community aid groups like Phenomenal Women are working to address the issues. Linda Giftash reports from Johannesburg.
The consequences of inequality are playing out every day in the historically black community of Soweto. The nonprofit group Phenomenal Women, which supports victims of gender-based violence, was due to open this office space nearly a year ago, but it was destroyed by vandals. Organizers say it's another side effect of high unemployment, rising drug use, and crime.
People struggle on a daily basis just to get by, just to put one plate of food on the table. So it's joblessness, there's no job opportunities. That's where GBV plays a huge part, because remember, if the woman is unemployed, the husband goes to work, he feels that he's the one bringing in the money. It puts her in a very vulnerable position.
Phenomenal Women has expanded its work beyond gender-based violence. This hub was intended to offer skills training and a community library and act as a base for its food drives. It's also collaborating with community agricultural programs to create jobs for youth. The idea is to break the cycle of violence and poverty with opportunities.
No one gets a job. We've been applying here, but no one gets a job. So we decided, actually, let's turn into agriculture. For someone my age, the worst case scenario is someone just turning into gangsters, because that's the, let me just say, in a place like this, that's the easy way out.
The issue goes back generations. The World Bank found that the country's history of racial segregation is continuing to leave Black Africans economically disadvantaged.
What it means is that those children that are disadvantaged from birth are never going to reach their full potential. And if they don't reach their full potential, then the country doesn't meet their full potential.
Better education and more equitable land ownership are among the solutions. The country already has affirmative action legislation that prioritizes hiring historically disadvantaged groups. But some experts say the policy has been abused and allowed nepotism and corruption, keeping the wealth in the hands of a few.
We've seen instances of specifically Black women not getting the promotion because of a quota system, which says you're allowed 3 Black women and 3 Black men, and 1 white woman and 1 white man. Trying to get a rainbow brochure in every department is having explicit detrimental effect on Black women. I think that's just more evidence that it's crazy and that we should be going by merit.
Despite the challenges, he says Black South Africans are increasingly among the country's wealthiest people. The World Bank says the government's taxation and wealth redistribution programs have made life better for the poorest. But the gap is widening. And with relentlessly rising unemployment rates, parents like Swartz are left wondering if their hard work would be more fruitful abroad.
I can't promise my child he's going to get a job. He doesn't work. He's done with school, but there's no opportunity for him. This is my own personal experience. So I don't know what the future of South Africa looks like. But for me personally, there's no future for us. There's no future for my kids.
Whether it's for major improvements at home or new prospects abroad, the inequality has many South Africans wishing for a better life. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Johannesburg.
Staying in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe has announced a $377 million project to deal with the housing shortage by constructing affordable homes before next year's election. But critics note such promises often come ahead of elections, and that there are Zimbabweans who have been on a housing waiting list for more than a decade. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
Unemployed Sylvester Mutemashinga is one of the many Zimbabweans who have no decent place to live in. For 9 years now, he has lived in this structure made mainly of plastic.
My wish is to get money and build a house so that I can stay comfortably with my family. I live with my wife, child, and nephew. But because of the difficulty of life, jobs are hard to come by. The small jobs we get do not pay enough. You end up getting money just for subsistence.
Across the road, posh houses are being built and some are on sale to the upper class in Zimbabwe. Kudzai Chatiza, a professor in rural and urban planning at the University of Zimbabwe, says the poor find it difficult to build or even secure property because of the high cost of living. He says, for example, Zimbabwe has the most expensive cement in the region.
So the cost of putting up structures needs to be looked at, and the cost of finance needs to be looked at as well, because our mortgage rates are between 40 and 50%. So it's already an economy that is unable to build houses at scale because of some of the costs of the basic ingredients that we require to put up a house.
The government says it is aware of the housing problem. Monica Mchangwa, Zimbabwe's Minister of Information, says the government has started constructing houses nationwide at more than 50 sites which should be ready for occupation by next year. She says the construction is part of efforts to clear the waiting list for homes, which has grown to more than 1.5 million.
The sites are expected to avail 324 blocks of flats, yielding a cumulative 5,184 units, and this is just for the emergency settlements. And the total cost required for construction of flats up to the 2023 amounts to US dollars $377 million.
In the past, similar pronouncements have been made with elections around the corner. Whatever the outcome, Mutemashinga hopes to get into a decent home soon. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Even though there has been a wave of immigrants from China to Africa in recent years, some families made that journey generations ago. VOA's Kang Chun Cheng has more from Nairobi about a Chinese Kenyan and his restaurant.
From popcorn chicken to beef chow fung, this restaurant has been offering famous street foods from Hong Kong since it opened in 2020. But the Cantonese eatery called Dragon Eye is located in Nairobi.
We do a lot of like a char siu bao, which is very popular in Hong Kong. We do the typhoon shelter crab, typhoon shelter prawns.
There are also coastal Swahili-style kebabs that cannot be found anywhere else in Nairobi. Owner Henry Tin was born and raised in Mombasa. He speaks English, Kiswahili, Cantonese, and a bit of Mandarin. His father, originally from Hong Kong, arrived in Kenya by ship during World War II to escape the Japanese occupation of China. Tin worked as a maritime engineer for 18 years. An economic downturn caused his family to move to Nairobi and pivot to the restaurant industry.
My mother was a good cook, so we cooked Chinese food. But I ate together with my house help and my neighbors. They were all Africans. So I was used to ugali and the local food. And of course, Mombasa, I used to climb the trees, get mangoes and baobab and all those things. Yeah.
Tin's mother initially taught the staff at their first restaurant. Then his wife, a Hong Kong native and trained chef, stepped in.
My mother passed away nearly about 15 years ago, so my wife took over.
In recent years, a new wave of migrants from China has arrived in Kenya to work on infrastructure projects linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Some Kenyans are wary of China's growing presence and find it difficult to overcome the language and culture differences. But for Ten, who was born and raised in Kenya, he says he feels wholly accepted by Kenyans, both as a citizen and within society.
For the past, I would say, 40 years, the Kenyans have learned to, knowing the world and the Chinese, because, China did a lot of investment here. Yeah, in the beginning, they don't know much about China. Now they know a lot about China. And the Kenyan people are very friendly, especially Mombasa, Nairobi. I can walk about, integrate with them, talking Swahili.
There is also a small community of people from Hong Kong living in Nairobi. Others emigrated in search of a different life and business opportunities, such as restaurants that cater to growing Chinese populations across East Africa.
Number one, they bring the culture here. A lot of Chinese also got married to the local people. They are doing farming in Kenya.
Ten says it's easier now to get more ingredients and vegetables like bok choy for his restaurant. He's hoping a growing Chinese presence in Kenya will mean more business for him. For VOA News, Kangjing Chang, Nairobi.
Thank you, Chang. It's lunchtime in Washington, so that's our show for today. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.